Stream now. I will now call to order the study session meeting of July 6th, 2020. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the meeting is being held electronically and members of the council are participating remotely pursuant to the council's electronic participation policy. Public access to the meeting is available on Local Government Access Channel 8 for Comcast subscribers and on the city's YouTube channel online, and by telephone using the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. Joanna, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Leidy?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford will be absent. Councilmember Witkovich?
Here.
Councilmember Peterson?
Here.
Councilmember Downing will be late tonight. Councilmember Brown?
Here.
Councilmember Goff?
Here.
Councilmember Duran Mollica?
Here.
Councilmember Escobar?
Here.
Okay, we have two items on the agenda for our study session this evening. The first one is a draft resolution on the city's commitment to advancing racial equity. So Rupa Venkatesh, I want to make sure I'm saying that correctly, assistant to the city manager, will present this item. Do you have something you'd like me to present or no? Is it just
if you
memo?
Yeah, want to pull up the draft resolution.
Sure.
So while the mayor is starting with that, first of all, good evening and thank you for having me tonight. I just want to say a huge kudos and thank you to City Manager Heather Geyer and City Clerk Joanna Smalls, who really put a lot of the meat into the memo and this draft resolution. The reason why we're bringing this forward to you tonight is that on June 22nd, during that City Council meeting, we brought forth a proposed diversity, inclusivity, and social equity next steps framework. A part of that framework was to bring forth this draft resolution for you all to take a look at. And we don't have to go through the PowerPoint presentation
Okay.
since you guys already saw
Is it
that.
at the end?
Yeah, just keep going.
Okay,
I think it's page 16. Yeah, right there.
perfect.
So if it's okay with everybody, I thought the easiest thing for me to do is maybe read this out loud once, and then council can go back and wordsmith anything that you guys want, if you're agreeable to that.
Okay.
Okay. So a resolution committing the city of Northglenn to advancing racial equity. Whereas the city of Northglenn acknowledges and condemns the history of systemic racism in the United States. Whereas the city of Northglenn is deeply saddened by the needless deaths of Black Americans like George Floyd and countless others. Whereas despite our community's collective efforts to create an inclusive and supportive community, we acknowledge that there still may be members of our community that do not feel welcome, included, or safe in Northglenn. Whereas the city of Northglenn is committed to safeguarding our community against the root causes of and the damages stemming from racism and hate, and to protecting the constitutional and human rights of every person who lives, works, and visits our city. Whereas the city of Northglenn joined the Government Alliance on Race and Equity in 2019, and GARE will serve as the city's advisor in advancing racial equity work. And whereas the mayor of Northglenn, city manager, and the Northglenn Police Department is committed to the work outlined in my Brother's Keeper Pledge. Whereas the city of Northglenn pledges to work with community leaders and residents to understand their concerns and continue to work towards a welcoming and inclusive community free of prejudice. Whereas the city, in partnership with GARE, is committed to developing a racial equity lens to use in its decision-making moving forward with the goal of continuing to build an equitable community. Whereas City Council is committed to creating a diversity, inclusivity, and social equity board to prioritize racial equity and improve outcomes for all groups. Whereas this resolution is an important step towards condemning racism and hate in all of its forms, and for true systemic change, and it's incumbent on city leaders and community members to listen with open hearts and minds and to take informed and meaningful actions. Whereas the city is committed to ongoing race relations trainings for elected officials, staff, and volunteers who serve on boards and commissions. And whereas the City Council commits to allocating funding, resources, and time needed to move forward with work as it relates to diversity, inclusivity, and social equity. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Northglenn, Colorado, that the Mayor and City Council stand against racism and reaffirm their commitment to creating a community where all individuals feel safe to live, work, learn, and play, and are treated equitably regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, income, political persuasion, or cultural practices. The City Council directs the city manager, together with the community, to develop a plan for delivering city services in a manner that promotes racial equity. Dated at Northglenn, Colorado this day. So I'm open to any feedback, comments, edits.
Hold on, let me see all my people. So I had a question, Rupa, and I wanted to offer this to council to see what you think. I was looking at the third one down that says, despite our community's collective efforts to create an inclusive and supportive community, we acknowledge that there still may be members. I'm wondering if we shouldn't really lean in and say there still are members, because we've heard from them already. And so maybe be a little more just affirmative with that language. How do other people feel about that?
I would agree with that.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to comment is the board. I like the name of it, Diversity, Inclusivity, and Social Equity Board. I had sent an email to council members. You didn't need to read it before tonight, but if you had, I referred to this board, but I like this name better, so thank you. So I see hands. I will start with Councilmember Mullica, and then we'll go to Brown.
Sure, and actually I have a question, not necessarily for the resolution, but it's actually something that I'm trying to process through when it comes to some of the work that we're going to be doing. And it's actually just a little bit of a clarification on the slides that we skipped, because we already seen those. But starting the conversation on internal, it says create a diversity, inclusivity, and social equity board is what we're going to call it. Lead with race-based on GARE model. So I was looking at the GARE website and I was trying to piece out, what does that mean? Like, what does that bullet mean? Lead with race-based on GARE model. How's it implemented?
Yeah, so how GARE works is, sorry, I think I'm hearing an echo from myself, but so how that works is GARE isn't trying to say anything that like diversity, inclusivity, and social equity is important, but once you start the conversation with race, then it leads into those other things. So that's why we're saying that we want to talk about diversity, inclusivity, and social equity as it relates to like LGBTQ rights and poverty, equities, and things like that, but using the GARE model to start that conversation with race.
Okay, and just specifically, just so I could get a better sense, is it using that race and equity tool that's on their website?
So that's part of it. So that'll be part of our internal, I guess, committee or task force, if you want to call it that, is to create a specific City of Northglenn racial equity toolkit that gets applied to policies that we can look at.
Okay, great. And I think that's really helpful, because I was trying to look through their toolkits, and I really just wanted to be very clear about how we're implementing the GARE model and what does that mean. Yeah. Specifically, I like the race and equity toolkit, and I'd love to see that kind of come through in our budgeting conversations coming up, because those are going to be starting up here in about a month. So I really like that framework of questioning, and I'd really like to see it included in the budgeting process, because I really feel like it's kind of part of the model that they're discussing and the purpose of this whole movement that we're trying to do. But other than that, those are just my clarifying questions, and I really support this resolution.
And sorry, that equity toolkit that you're talking about. So if you look on the first page of the resolution, it's the third one from the bottom. That's what that refers to.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have Councilmember Brown, and then Witkovich, and then Goff.
Can you hear me? Did you unmute me? Yes. Okay. So I have a question in just mentioning George Floyd, and there were so many after that, there were quite a few. Should we just focus on him? That's just one of my statements. And then I'm good with everything else. Julie talked about what I wanted to talk about. The mayor talked about my other thing. We don't need to put anything in there. Are we a sanctuary city?
I thought so.
Yeah, that resolution was passed in 16, 17? I don't remember.
I think so. I thought we did.
Yeah, I'm not sure it used that word or that label, sanctuary city, but there was a resolution that it was worded such that police don't stop people for anything other than crimes that are just ordinary, the crimes that they would stop anybody for.
And that was more specific, so forget that question. I'm done. I like it. Thank you for the hard work, Rupa and team.
Councilmember Whitkovich?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, thank you, Rupa. I also agree with all of this and the suggestions made so far. To agree with Councilmember Brown, I was thinking, maybe we should even include victims' names before Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, just maybe that. I don't know how many we want to include, but I agree that maybe we should include more than George Floyd in there. But and then also the 6th whereas clause down on the first page, could we add city council?
That's a good idea.
That's my last suggestion. Thank you.
I like that suggestion. And Rupa, I don't know if it's the language in a resolution, but when we add all those, should it be are instead of is? Like the mayor, the city manager, Northglenn Police Department, council.
Yeah,
just the verb. I was wondering.
Yep, that probably makes a lot more grammatical sense.
Okay, so Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, my kind of suggestion, which we can discuss or however, I'm just kind of curious, under section 1, which is way towards the bottom, there's a whole list of categories, I guess you could say, that people are sometimes discriminated against. And I would just wonder if we could have some language in there that says that we're not limiting ourselves to this list, that there may be more ways that people get discriminated against that we've listed here.
Are you talking about where it says section 1?
Section 1, right, yes. And it says race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, income, political persuasion, or cultural practices. There's always religion. Who knows, some other things might come up. I just think if there was just a way to say, list these, but not limited to these. In legal documents, there's some way to do that. That doesn't sound as awkward as what I'm trying to suggest. Right. Just something
that makes sense.
Okay. Something like included but not limited to.
Yes, something like that.
I support that. Welcome, Joyce. So we are looking at the draft resolution. So if you have any comments or questions on that, that's where we are. So I'm going to go back to Councilmember Brown, and then Councilmember Peterson is next.
I have a general question. All of our proclamations are signed by the mayor. Is there an opportunity for city council to sign that too, so that we're all linked to it? You know what I mean? We're making this promise, this proclamation. It might be nice to have all of our signatures on it. Oh, can't have mine. No, you'll have to fake it. Call my 21-year-old. She could do it. But I'm wondering if we need something more than, and I'm not jabbing at you, Mayor, please understand. I think you're fine. Very important. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't do something that ties us all to it, Just a question.
So this is a resolution. This question might be for Joanna, if she's with us. I'm wondering if, in addition to, we take this resolution and make it a declaration that, like a letter that can go out from council. I don't know. Joanna, can you answer that?
Good evening.
Hi.
Hello. So what we've done in the past for resolutions, if all of council is in favor of sponsoring that piece, is that instead of the mayor being the sole sponsor of the resolution, council could sponsor it en banc, and that would show support that all of council was in favor of bringing that resolution forward. So that's one way we could handle that. Usually when we add all of council's signatures to a document, we've done that with a proclamation before. However, I would just keep in mind that a proclamation doesn't carry as much weight as a resolution does. So that would be something to balance against that. So those are some options.
Thank you.
Is everyone in favor of doing that? Adding your name? Yes, some people, yes.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, that wasn't a yes. I'm on my laptop. It does not have that raise your hand feature that I can find. So, I am not in favor of something that's going to take longer. So, whichever one of those is going to be something that we can, like decide and have as our starting point and move forward more quickly is the way I would go. And the other thing, I'd like to just get some idea of. And I know maybe we've got another meeting, a special session planned for more details, but like when we would start, taking action on this resolution, or what the first step would be, just so that our residents could have a sense of, what to expect or when to expect it.
So some of the things in there we've already started. But yeah, if we need to create a timeline, I think that might be a really great idea. Maybe even a document that has a timeline going forward for our residents. I think that makes sense.
So for the July 15th study session that you'll be having next week, Heather had tentatively put on that agenda for us to go over the Diversity, Inclusivity, and Social Equity Board and next steps with all of that. And then for this draft resolution, it would come back July 13th during the regular session meeting for you guys to approve and finalize, to approve a final resolution.
So that's just Monday. So as far as the change goes, Joanna, does that, like if we, instead of putting mayor at the bottom, if all of council wanted to sign it, that doesn't take longer, to Councilmember Goff's question.
Are you asking about a resolution or a proclamation?
Yeah. Resolution.
So I would need to check on the form of the resolution to include all of council's signatures. We typically don't do that with a resolution. The piece with the resolution would be to sponsor en banc, which means all of the council. It's probably a pretty simple question regarding just the form of resolution. If council does want to add everybody's signature to the bottom.
Okay.
I
don't know if it's necessary.
A sponsorship versus the signature.
Okay. Well, let's circle back because Councilmember Peterson has been waiting so patiently. So Councilmember Peterson, and then Esquivel, and then Downing.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, members of council. Good to see everybody here tonight. A couple things. You'll always hear me talk about the concept of precedent and what we're doing in the short term, elevated by where we're at and our passions and our emotions, and what that establishes down the line. When the mayor signs a resolution, it's in consultation and approval with council, correct?
Yeah.
And so the issue is, I have no problem with all of us signing this, but at the same time, and I like that, but at the same time, does that mean every resolution needs then to be signed by every council? So it's like, I'm okay with establishing the precedent. It's like the mayor supports it, we support it, we can tell our constituents we support it. And I don't feel the need to have extenuating signatures on this as if we really, really support this one, as opposed to all the ones that we support indirectly. I didn't sign the mask proclamation, and I really, really supported that. I really, really support this, and I don't feel the need to sign it. So in terms of precedent, again, we're living in very passionate and difficult times in the city and the state and the country. But I think I'd like to keep it to the precedent of the mayor signs it, and that signature means with the approval of council. And I'm strong enough in my opinions to be able to share my vote and whatever reason with my constituents. Second reason, I also, for similar reasons, with mentioning George Floyd early on, and then the suggestion of adding more names, I actually would probably favor, and again, it's not a hill I'm going to die on. It's just something for council to think about. But I would be in favor of not adding any names. And here's why. Our commitment and my commitment to racial equity and justice goes beyond the horrible events of George Floyd. It's been a commitment that I've had throughout my career in education, throughout my career in the law, and throughout just my life as an individual. We as a council, I hope, didn't wake up to racial inequities after the George Floyd murder. And I say that purposely, after the George Floyd murder. So what names do we have? 5, 10? Who do we miss? Who's left out when we make a litany of names? And so our response to this isn't based on current events. Again, this is 6.1 of our strategic plan, one of 9 that we're doing as a large scale aspect to make our city the best it can be, separate from any individual act, person, or incidents in recent American history. And so I'm okay with that, and I'm okay if we have Mr. Floyd's name or others, but again, I think that sets a dangerous precedent in the sense that we're reacting to something as opposed to where we're not fully committed to this aspect of our strategic plan, regardless of the people. And again, I'd be worried about who we forget. I mean, we could have a list of things going back to, for God's sake, 1619 through Reconstruction. So I'd be hesitant to adding a list of names that is the indicator that has prompted us to act on this appropriate measure.
Thank you. Councilmember Escobar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To pick up where Councilmember Peterson left off, the wording says needless deaths of Black Americans like George Floyd. And it says countless others. I think that incorporates any name you want to put in there. And I'm okay with removing George Floyd, but we have to have a reason. I mean, it makes sense to have his name in there, probably more so than not because of the current events that we're in. But I'm okay with removing it. And I don't think we should add any more names. It says countless others. And it doesn't really say George Floyd. It says like George Floyd, because there are countless others. And I don't support signing any resolution or proclamation. Mayor, you're the face of the city, and your signature pretty much says what we have to say. And if there are questions in resolutions, you can look at who voted for and who voted against, if people really want to know. That's my input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Downing, and then Goff.
Thank you very much. Just to add my 2 cents to this, I really don't believe we need to add all of our names. Many years ago, we used to have every name in the title area where it was say Mayor Leidy, Councilwoman Joyce Downing, and so forth. And for many reasons, we decided to just, because you are the face of the city, and we do support, and you can tell by the votes if someone does not support the resolution. There's a need to change it right now. It's working well. I don't need to sign anything. I really think that I do think when you sign something, that also adds that the rest of the city council is supporting the resolution. So I support what you're doing. So those are the 2 things I had. And I apologize for coming in late, but I had another obligation I had to attend to. So thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. I will agree with Councilmember Escobar, Downing, Peterson. I don't think all the signatures need to be on it. This meeting right now, the discussion we're having is public record, and people will be able to see, how we're expressing our support for it. And I'm fine with not having all these signatures on it. I would say that I do believe it is important to list George Floyd. Whether or not we list any other names, I think it's important to have a name in there to remind ourselves that we're not just talking about statistics, we're talking about individuals. And his murder was so horrendously uncalled for that I do feel like that it does seem to be the spark that kind of got things rolling in our time, the time we're in right now. So I'm fine with leaving it exactly as it stands.
Anybody else want to weigh in? Councilmember Malika?
Yeah, I'm fine with leaving it the way it is, and I'm okay if you sign it just like any other resolution. I think what matters most to me is kind of going back to Catherine's point of providing a timeline for our community of the work that's going to be done, because that's what's, I think, probably more important than this resolution. This is just a statement, but we really want to actually see that work come to life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really liked that idea. I saw Broomfield did one for COVID related stuff, but it was so clear for residents that it really helped people understand what step was coming first, next, and after that. So I think that's a great idea. So Rupa, if you could take that forward, I'm sure you'll create something awesome.
Yeah, so July 15th, if it's okay with everybody, that can be the first item before the police accountability board conversation.
Right. Perfect. Councilmember Brown?
First of all, I'd like to tell you all that I had no idea it was July. Retirement is great. I am actually agree with everything that everybody else said. I just wondered if the signatures would make a difference. But I understand that you are the face of the city, and I've said that before for previous mayors. So I'm totally good. As far as just George Floyd's name, after listening to Antonio, Councilmember Escobar, I'm more inclined to leave a name out, but I'm not as God, forget it. As one of our council people said earlier, it's not the hill I'm going to die on. I believe that was Randall.
Okay. Any other discussion about this item? Do you have what you need, Rupa?
So just to clarify, so the mayor is just going to sign the resolution. For the second, whereas we're leaving it as is, we're not adding it. Okay. And then the third, whereas we're changing to acknowledge that there still are members of our community. And then we're also adding the city council to the My Brother's Keeper's Pledge. And then including some language in section 1 to say including but not limited to those groups, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, then I am all set. And this will be brought back July 13th.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, the second item we have is COVID-19 proposed Business is Back recovery grant. So we have our Economic Development Director, Debbie Tuttle, with us to present this item. And I have your presentation, Debbie. It'll be up in just a second. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh.
Do you see it?
Yep, I do. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Tonight, I will be providing an update on the Elevate Small Business Grant and seeking input on a proposed business recovery grant. Before we get started, I'd like to personally thank our Elevate Small Business Grant staff and especially our task force members. Mayor Pro Tem Wilford, Council members Brown, Peterson, and Witkovich for their time, dedication, and commitment in implementation of the grant. Today, we're going to talk, the reason why I set up the memo as well as the presentation is that the way we did was one, to get feedback in advance, as well as talk about some of the lessons learned from the Elevate grant that came up. And so we wanted to have that opportunity to do that. As a reminder for the public listening and for council, this grant, as well as the other grant, was approved for the CARES Act funding. If you want to go to the next slide. Mayor. So again, this Elevate Small Business Grant, we approved $850,000. We issued 131 grants were approved for almost $500,000. The remaining balance that we approved from the $850,000 is around $351,000. And the average grant funding per businesses of those 131 grants was about an average of $3,809. And again, this was funded by the CARES Act. We also approved that same evening a grant for $150,000 for the Colorado Enterprise Fund. But as we know, that CARES that loan, that micro loan, was not eligible under the CARES Act. So even though we did approve $1 million, we did not implement the Colorado Enterprise Fund. But also, and again, the Elevate Small Business Grant, I can't tell you how successful it was. I want to just also give you an idea that the businesses that we talked to, they loved it. I mean, it really, truly made a difference in these businesses and being able to get through that crisis zone. But now that we're moving into the recovery and the majority of all the businesses are open in some fashion, now we want to look at what did they have to do to get open? And we're going to talk about that tonight. But also wanted to talk a little bit about the dining mini grant, the gift cards that we did. Council approved $125,000 again from the CARES Act funding. We had 5,000 cards and certificates from 40 different restaurants. And you're seeing them come up all the time. My sister was at Atlanta Bread this weekend and she held up her card proudly and said, "I got this from our grab bags." And she said, and he said, Peter, who's the owner there, said, "Well, I was wondering when those are going to start coming around." So again, the restaurants really appreciated that. Next slide, Mayor. So tonight, what we want to talk about is a recovery grant and action steps from council to get some guidance. One, the grant eligibility reimbursable costs. We're going to talk about that. What kind of costs and expenses would qualify under the recovery grant. Also, the business eligibility requirements, and also what the grant amount will be. So that's what I'm seeking guidance from the council tonight. Next slide, please. So these are the things that we're proposing under the Businesses Back Recovery Grant. COVID-19 related personal protective equipment, or what we know as PPE. Number 2, COVID-19 related equipment and operating supplies. And 3, COVID-19 related workspace and physical space modifications. And we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes on examples. Next slide, please. First of all, I went to Corey. He looked over the entire memo and the proposed outline and grant. Is this CARES Act eligible? Yes. COVID-19 proposed business grants are allowed for funding. Yes. Are these types of COVID-19 related expenses allowed for funding? Yes. And what makes equipment, supplies, workspace, and physical space modifications allowable? It must be directly necessitated because of COVID-19. So when we are talking about the different equipment, and again, I'll be providing some different examples of workspace, physical space modifications. Again, it can't be you just go out and buy a new computer to buy a new computer. You have to have proof that it was related specifically to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what PPE could be for our businesses. If you've been out there, gone to restaurants, gone to different businesses, I'm sure you've all seen the plexiglass dividers. We have them here in City Hall. Offices have them all over, dentist's office. You go to the restaurants, they're there, gloves, masks, face and eyewear, sneeze guards, shields, thermometers, outerwear garments, safety signage. All of these would be considered under PPE equipment, again, that we would propose under this grant. And I can tell you, I don't know probably any business that hasn't had to put some kind of PPE in to be able to go under the requirements of the government and the guidelines. So next slide, please. First, before I go further, is there any questions on that I should ask? No? Okay, good. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Councilmember Peterson had a question.
Oh, yes.
Debbie, I'm happy to hold my questions to the end if you'd like, but I do have a quick question on this. So whatever you want to do in terms of what would make your presentation easier, hold questions to the end or take questions incrementally.
Well, why don't we take them at the end, because I'll be bringing all of these back up at the end of the conversation. So why don't we do that, if that's all right with you, Councilmember Peterson? Yeah,
that's great. And maybe you'll address this later, but one of the questions that you can consider for this question to the end, so I won't have to ask it again, is what about this idea of this being retroactive? Is this going to be stuff that people buy from this point moving forward? Or what about the funds that they've spent already on this that they might be looking for reimbursement for? So if you could keep that in the back of your head, I'd sure appreciate it.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. Equipment and operating supplies. So this is important. A lot of our businesses have had to change the way they do things. They've had to learn how to take online store orders. They've had to have mobile payments, delivery and tracking. Again, different kinds of equipment. As you know, here at the City Hall, I've got now a new webcam that I'm looking at right now, and we had speakers put in. So there's new equipment that's been needed to be able to do this. And a lot of our small businesses, I can tell you, have never had to put some of these in place. Some of our larger ones have had some things in place for this. But after going through a seminar with the Restaurant Association, especially for our restaurants that didn't allow for payments online, didn't have a tracking mechanism. You know, you can go to Uber or Grubhub or any of those and you see how it actually tracks. But there was not a lot of on-store or restaurant capabilities with a lot of our small restaurants. And these are some things that the Economic Development Department would be working with the small businesses also to look at not only now, but in the future of how we might be able to incorporate some of these. And we'll talk about the deadline because it will be retroactive and go forward. So next slide, please. And just a comment on the other one, there's different software. There's software and hardware. So that's included on the last slide. Now, workspace and physical space modifications, bathrooms in many of the restaurants have had to be modified. The stalls, the water, the sink, the people waterless sinks and so forth, wire touchless entries to get into the offices, to get into buildings. You'll see here right at City Hall, lots of partitions that have had to go up to separate the different people that are working in the same areas. The gal to the left on the right at the top, you can't see it very well there, but there's a big divider in front of her. That could fall under the PPE. But again, different reception areas might have to be modified. I went to Bad Daddy's this weekend and the reception area had to be totally modified of how people come in. One, they weren't using the revolving door anymore, right? So they had to put a reception station outside to take reservations. Some of our restaurants didn't have electronic beepers. Those are things that might qualify. So these are the three main areas, but I'm going to go one more slide. And this is that was inside. This is the physical space modifications outside. So all of the restaurants, the things that we did with the temporary use permit to allow restaurants to expand outside into the parking lots and sidewalks, them going in and getting new umbrellas and tables, barriers there, different signage, directional signage like no alcohol beyond this point. Different things like that would only complement what we've already done. I do also see that there may be in the future, gyms that might be able to do this as well. So some space modifications might be needed there as well. So this is pretty much what I'm proposing in this grant. Next slide, please. And I'd like to talk a little bit about other ideas for the grant, but I think what we'll do is just kind of hold off for that into the end and maybe come back to this slide if that would be all right with council. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our last grant was only eligible for businesses that were, they had to be in business for 6 months. They could have 25 or less employees. They could not be home-based. They couldn't be national corporate. There was quite a few restrictions on different types of industry sectors that we did not allow. So this is just looking at raw data. This is both storefront and home-based businesses. So we have about 200 home-based businesses, about 628 storefronts. This does not include nonprofits, churches, schools. All of those have business licenses as well. But try to give you just a visual of what the makeup is of our businesses. Next slide, please. This is our Northglenn business industry sectors. So as you can see on the 202, the majority of our businesses are made up of service industries. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But when we go through this, think about services as it could be professional services, it could be lawyers, attorneys, and so on and so forth. It could be hairdressers, it could be nail salons, anybody who's providing a service. That's a majority of our businesses. And then if you take a look at the 132 right there, that's going to be, the shopping. That's our retail, or our dining, excuse me. That's our dining. And then also 108, which is health and wellness. We have a huge amount of gyms and health and wellness companies. Again, they can fall also potentially under services, but the way we classify it is, so dentists, chiropractors, physicians, but also that is also going to be like people that do the estheticians, what they do that, or that's actually going to fall under beauty and personal care. I apologize. Health and wellness is a lot of the gyms. And I don't know if you know, but we have a lot of gyms, a lot of CrossFit. So that's where that stands. So this just gives you kind of an overview of our businesses and the types of businesses. This includes home-based, as well as we have approximately 100 corporately owned national chains. So those are going to be, your Best Buys, your Lowe's, your Texas Roadhouse, the nationally owned and operated, corporately owned and national chains. Next slide, please. So the reason why we wanted to go through this first, before we talk about what other types of things that might be included, was these were kind of lessons learned also from the business grant that we just did, so the Elevate grant. So again, we have about 628 storefronts, 200 of those are home-based. And then are there any industry sectors that are not eligible? On the last grant, we didn't allow real estate. We didn't allow hospitals. We didn't allow storage. We didn't allow nonprofits. We didn't allow banks. And the reason why we didn't do that was they were not impacted severely like the other businesses. So that was a criteria that we put in the Elevate grant. So one of the questions I'll be asking in a few minutes is, are there some industry sectors that should not be allowed in this? Or should we just be allowing all businesses? Which we'll talk about that in a minute as well. Business with revenue less than. This was one of the things that came up, and definitely when we get to questions and comments, the Elevate Grant Task Force can definitely chime in on this, was we did see businesses that for the Elevate Grant that were making over $1 million in sales revenue. And there was a lot of question was, should we tighten up the restrictions a little bit more if we were to go forward, less than $1 million? So these are going to be the small businesses. So this is why we wanted to have this conversation. If it's going to be all businesses, including corporately owned, home-based, everybody, then I don't think the business revenue is really going to apply for this grant. If we're going to keep it and maintain this to just small businesses, then it would apply. We would probably want to tighten up those restrictions to potentially less than $1 million. Or do we open up this grant to all businesses, home-based, storefronts, all industry sectors that can prove that they actually had to invest in COVID-19 PPE equipment and workspace modifications? So that's one of those questions that we're going to ask. Length of time is business. And this, again, on the Elevate grant, we had 6 months. I'd like to say there was a lot of new businesses, not a lot, but there were probably 6 new businesses. Let's just use scooters as an example. They hadn't been open for 3 months, but they weren't eligible, right? But they were a new company, and that new company, scooters, had to put in COVID-19 related improvements. Whether they didn't pay the rent under the Elevate, so they didn't qualify there. But for this grant, I would suggest that any company that had to make those kind of improvements to their business potentially could qualify. So again, I'm just prefacing that as a way to look at it differently. Demonstrate need for grant. The bottom line is you have to do this on anything on the CARES Act funding is you have to do this. What we did put into our grant for the Elevate grant was we put a percentage of decline in gross revenues, but we didn't make that as a mandate. We didn't say, well, if it was 50% or 10% or 3%, or if it's 75%, we just said you had to have a decline in gross revenues. So again, this came out of doing the Elevate grant. Did we want to tighten up any kind of eligibility here to say that you had to have more than 50%, let's just say, or 30% of a decline in your gross revenues? Something for consideration for this grant. We could do that also under a decline in gross revenues, or we could do it another way. My preference would be the percentage of decline in gross revenues, because that actually was received very well through the Elevate grant. But again, do we want to tighten that up depending on whether we want to keep this to all businesses, or do we want to say, well, okay, maybe an insurance company only had 2% decline in gross revenues because they were able to open the whole time. But with that said, they might still have had to put in PPE. They might have had to put in sneeze guards, right? I think about our home-based businesses, and I'll just bring that up now, is we've got some home-based hair salons. You know, they've had to change the way they do business, and they have had to purchase a lot of PPE as well. And I'm sure there's a lot of other home-based businesses that have had to adapt to these kind of things. So that's why, again, we wanted to ask these questions in advance before we brought a proposal totally, fit specifically as we move forward. So next slide, please. Number of employees. Again, that's why we're talking about this. Depending on if you want to open up this grant to all businesses, right? The Elevate grant was 25 or less full-time equivalent employees. We could, on this grant, do no employee requirement, because the bottom line is if we were to do, again, corporately owned businesses, they had to put in a lot of equipment in there. But they never qualified. So all those big businesses, like let's just use Boondocks as an example, they weren't eligible for the Elevate grant because they had over 100 employees. So they could never apply for the rent grant. So again, this grant is a little bit different. This is a recovery grant. Now they're opening up business. What did they have to do? What did they have to do to make their operation so that people could come there and be safe, as well as their employees? So if you look at the backside of restaurants now, it looks a lot different than the way it did before, because they're trying to protect their employees while they're cooking in the back room. So it's not just masks. They have sneeze guards and so forth, and plexiglass in a lot of those restaurants in the back room that you and I don't see. So how many business locations are grants eligible for? This was, again, from the Elevate grant. We only allowed businesses that had more than one location in Northglenn to apply for that grant. We do have several businesses that do have several locations. Our two Starbucks, the one on Melody as well as the one on Garland at 108th, those are owned by the same company. The other Starbucks are owned by different companies, but let's just use those. We have, for instance, the Smokers World. We have two Smokers World. Well, both of those locations had to put in PPE, right? Both of those locations had to get new equipment to be able to operate and to open their stores. So again, that's a new question for this grant, is that if they had to do it at both locations, would they be eligible at both locations? Are businesses eligible for grants if they sublease space? So in the Elevate grant, we did not allow this, but let's talk about that. So let's look at, and the reason this was people that were leasing space. Again, the Elevate grant was for rent. So somebody who was leasing space, subleasing space from, let's just say it was an attorney's office. They have a little 500 square foot they're subleasing. Well, we provided the grant for the main tenant who is paying the rent. We did not allow it for anybody subleasing. Look at Phoenix Salons. They have over 35 little businesses in there, right? They were not allowed, the individual businesses, to use the sublease because we gave the grant, the rental grant, to the actual owner that was having to pay the property owner on it, not the individual subleases. However, with this one, if you look at Phoenix Salon and you go into those salons, each one of those salons are having to make improvements to keep their individual stalls safe for them as well as their customers. So again, another question different from the Elevate grant. So we just wanted to bring those forward. Next slide. So now grant funding. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And I can make, I have ideas of what I think probably would be a good idea, but let's talk about this. We have $350,000 left from the $850 from the Elevate grant, right? So if we were to do this, let's just say the max of the grant was $2,500. We could serve 140, and you can see how it goes: 5,000, 70, 75, 46, 10,000, 35 businesses. I use the 350 because that's what's left from the Elevate grant. However, we did approve another 150,000 that we did for the CEF loan. We could increase that amount to the 450,000, or we could go to 500,000 or a different number. My personal thought was that I think the maximum I would probably do on this grant is 5,000 if we included corporate and larger companies. I would do an estimate, if we did that, 350,000, maximum of 5,000. Estimated average grant, I think, will probably be around 1750 per business, so we could actually serve 200. And the reason why, again, we did this with Elevate grant. We said the average grant was going to be about $4,000, and it was $3,800. A lot of businesses won't have this kind of stuff. And if they do have it, it's going to be probably for a smaller amount because we have small businesses. The ones that we found on Elevate grant that took the whole 6,000 were the larger companies, right? They weren't the corporately owned and so forth, but they had large rents. So people that had large spaces, like Phoenix Salon, for instance, they're sole proprietors, so they actually did qualify under the grant. They had to take 6,000. They took the maximum of 6,000. I don't see, except for the larger businesses, taking the 5,000 or whatever you determine the right amount to be. But these are some thoughts that we could do. Next question, and we'll go back to all these slides in just a few minutes here. Grant oversight. So we had a great way of doing this and trying out the Elevate grant. There's some different options here. Staff reviews and completes a rubric, and an appointed task force makes the final decision. That's what we did on the Elevate grant. Number two, we could have the staff review everything. And again, the staff is going through and making sure all the invoices are matching up and that they qualify for COVID-19 and so forth. That's what we did on the Elevate grant as well. We would complete the rubric. That's what we did also on how we did the Elevate grant. But our Business Expansion and Retention Committee could make the final decision. We have a committee that does that. Becky, Councilmember Brown sits on there as a liaison for the Business Expansion Committee. Again, I know everybody's schedules are busy, so I wanted to look at some different options that we might have. We could, 3, staff review and complete the rubrics, again, the way we're doing it right now, and a person from finance and the Economic Development Director, myself, could make the final approval. I think, and we'll go through this, I'm going to ask for some input from Councilmember Peterson and Whitkovich and also Brown, because they sat on the committee and I think they saw how we had streamlined everything and how they saw that we really looked at every one of those invoices and we made sure everything was correct. So I feel comfortable that we could move to a number 2 or a number 3 for sure. And then what we would do for reporting and transparency, again, is all individual applications and rubrics are open to public review. And 2, do the monthly reports and numbers of grants open, just like we're doing right now. You've got a list in your packet right there of where they are located geographically on our geocodes, what industry sectors they came from, what types of amounts. And then we'll also report it back into the connection and to City Council. So that's kind of what I was thinking of. Let's go to the next slide here. So what's next, right? We'll go back through these slides again. But if council wanted to pursue this type of a grant, it would be council approving it. based on what the feedback we get tonight. Develop an online application and a rubric, exactly like what we did for the Elevate grant. Develop a business agreement. And again, I did ask Corey, did we really need that agreement? He felt like we did. I had talked with him about having a like an affidavit in there that said you do swear and true, and we have that actually in the Elevate grant when they sign it, but he felt more comfortable that we did an individual business grant with everybody who got the grant, mostly because it is CARES Act. We want to make sure that we're covering everything there. We would market the grant, we would launch the grant, and then grants would be reviewed, processed, and then we would track the results. So if you wouldn't mind, Mayor, would you go back to the first slide, not the first slide, but when we're trying to make some of these decisions here. So first of all, let's go here. Other business grant expenses that you would like to see in this new recovery grant. So open for discussion on that.
So I see Councilmember Mullica with her hand up.
Yeah, my question was broader than the specific one. Do we want to wait for what my question was, or do you want to address what Debbie just asked about other business grant expenses?
I would prefer now we start talking about that, and then we move into, because some of the ideas may impact, those other questions.
Can I speak, Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Brown.
Sorry. I think, in my own personal opinion, this should come till the end, until we make a decision on how much money we want to spend, and then we can start talking once we get through this part about what else we want to do. But I think that we need to tie this down so we know, leave this to the end and tie down what we want to do with small business grants.
Okay.
That's just my opinion.
So Councilmember Mullica, what was your question?
Okay, so my question was, it was actually a broader question. I'm looking at the amount of money that we've already kind of put towards the business community, and I really want to know how much CARES Act money do we still have? And maybe this is an Amanda or Rupa question, but like, what's the bigger picture here? Because I see how much we put into this, right here on the slide. But what are some of the other expenses we have, and how much care funds?
I actually have that. I talked to Rupa about that this morning. So out of the 3.1 million, we have, let me see. We have, out of the 1.3 million, we have, out of the business grant, we've done 850,000, 150,000 for modifications and expenses for telework, hand sanitizers at the parks for 20,000. The gift cards we talked about at 125. Support the community organizations at 500,000. Masks for residents at 69.6. The education campaign related to public health mask coverings at 50,000. Community resource navigator at 35,000. 25,000 for potentially for payroll expenses for public and safety employees. Education materials for non-English speaking, 5,000. And then there's several others that are in there as well. So we have about half left of the 3.1 to spend, and we have to spend that by December 2nd.
Okay, thank you. I think that just helps me get an idea of how much extra money we have to put towards businesses.
Great.
Another question that I have is, can delivery fees be included as potential expenses that could be reimbursed?
I don't know that answer, but that's something that I could ask Corey about. That's a good idea.
Just curious. I've ordered lots of Chipotle.
Me too.
Which has a free delivery fee. And then a question about your health and wellness sector. Do like senior facilities or residential living are included in that, or can they be included at all?
No, they can be included because they are a business. They are in that 850 there, but we count those under real estate because they're actually in that category. So you're not seeing them in there. So we have 4, I believe, assisted living. facilities. So they would definitely qualify as a business. They have a business license, and absolutely. And they've had to put in a lot of PPE as well. But most of those had more than 25 employees. So again, that's why we wanted to have this discussion about the employees, because then they wouldn't qualify, right? And the same thing happened. At the time, we did not have them in the first grant. But this grant, they're having to put in a lot of PPE, and I definitely would highly recommend that we do that.
Yeah, and actually, one of the questions that I had, a follow-up from that is there a possibility to actually prioritize those businesses? Because of the importance of their safety. So for example, the way that this virus is transmitting, it's those that have, those that are in tight spaces, residential living, 48 hours prior to even seeing symptoms, those are the ones that are seeing the biggest impact with the transmission. So the virus is actually more, infectious, if you will, the 48-hour period before we actually even get symptoms. So being able to protect and support those types of facilities who are already still struggling with PPE, struggling to keep their residents safe, struggling to keep their staff safe. I mean, it's actually a community health concern. So if there's any way to prioritize those types of organizations, that would be great. And I don't know if that's possible, but that would be an idea for me. Another question that I had, and this might be a reach here, but is there any way that we might be able to prioritize or even provide money for those businesses that continue to do telecommuting for their workforce as a potential to mitigate spread of COVID-19? So for example, if you sent all of your workers home, you could get reimbursed for monitors and laptops and all of that stuff with this grant. Would there be any way to kind of build in, hey, if you continue to keep your staff at home, then that could be an incentive. That's just a throwing out there. Maybe it doesn't qualify, but I feel like that could be helpful for some organizations to just keep people at home for a little longer.
I like that idea. I'll definitely bring that up to Corey.
Okay. And then I noticed for the previous grant, we didn't include nonprofits in schools.
Right.
So I would be interested to hear what other people have to say about maybe expanding the grant to those organizations as well. So
that's a good idea too. Now the nonprofit grant that you approved for the $500,000 for, I guess we need to make sure that doesn't conflict with those dollars. And again, this is conversation, so that's why we went and have this. I really like the telecommuting. I like the delivery charge. The prioritizing, I think we as a staff can prioritize that. Okay. I mean, they would be the first ones that we need to be sitting down with and making sure that they take advantage of this. There's some other, again, if council decides that we can do larger businesses that had to make some major changes, right? I mean, the larger businesses had to make some major changes. So I think there's definitely staff can do the prioritization, definitely with them first, without any problem at all. I did want to add, just because I found it in my notes. So far today, we've committed through the investment impact of ideas, 1.48 million of the 3.1, and I am wrong. We have to spend it by December 4th, not December 2nd. And I would also say that of the residents that responded to the CARES Act dollars, when the residents had signed in, about 22 of those had other ideas, but 13 or more than 50% of those really wanted us to provide more funding to our businesses. So just as a thought process on that. And also I'd like to come back to Councilmember Peterson's, is that the way we've got it right now, the grant would be retroactive as of March 15th. That's what we did on the other one. And it would go through September 30th. Because I think what's going to happen is, hopefully a lot of things don't change, but one, they've already had to take advantage of putting everything in now to get open. as they reopen. So we want to make sure that they get take advantage of those monies. But some things could change, right, of how regulations and guidelines come down the pike. So that's why we wanted to extend it out to September 30th, because we don't know what tomorrow might bring. There may be something else that Tri-County Health, CDC might come up with that they're asking them to do. So we could change that even later than September 30th, but that was our thought process was March 15th through September 30th.
Great, thank you. So I have Councilmember Witkovich and then Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think we're just addressing other grant expense ideas right now. I like Julie's idea also about the telecommuting, reimbursing for monitors, laptops, that sort of thing. I think that's a great idea. I think Debbie did a great job coming up with everything. It's hard to think of anything. Just one thing I wanted to put out there is possibly advertising for businesses to bring back business. I don't know if that would be something we want to consider, but that's all I've got.
Thank you. Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. A couple of things. One of the things that we discovered on being a part of the Elevate Grant Task Force is, and we thought about this with the advice and the opinions of council of what industries, and we don't want to be industry heavy, and how do we distribute this equally amongst the 4 wards, ended up not being an issue. One of the things that happened is that there was enough money to go around to everybody that met the criteria and everybody that applied. And so we were really, really fortunate not to be in a position of have to establish criteria or pick winners or losers or anything along those lines. One of the things, and I'll let other members chime in on this if they'd like, for me that was very humbling is, you didn't see people, dare I say, taking advantage. They would show the documentation, they would show what their rent was, and people would be humbly asking for $1,200 for their rent. And, as opposed to, well, my rent's $1,200, but it's really $6,000. No, they would, everybody played by the rules. Everybody was up and up. And we were fortunate not to be in a position to have to prioritize anything. And so I think if we did this at about $350K, we might be seeing something similar. And I would agree with Debbie's idea of keeping it at around a 5K max on this. Because again, our experience, or at least my experience on this task force, showed that people didn't overreach and they provided the documentation. Another thing too, one of the latent benefits of this was obviously somebody couldn't apply for this unless their house was in order, so to speak, right? And so we had people with delinquent taxes that would apply for this, and our staff said, no, you owe the city your money and the taxes, and it was a real positive incentive to get people on board and do the things they need to do. So a couple initial comments, and I may go back and address some questions for anybody or respond again, but a couple initial responses to Debbie's presentation. I don't know. I look at this as very much an incidence of utilitarianism, which I believe is defined as doing the most amount of good for the most amount of people. And so for that reason, I would not favor a cap of 25 people and limiting it to small business. I would favor expanding this, as we've had this discussion, to home-based businesses. And again, not all of the 200 home-based businesses, everybody would be eligible, right? Home-based business, if I'm doing my own accounting firm, I don't necessarily need to set up PPE equipment. But if I'm a home-based business doing a salon, then I do, right? And so again, the evidentiary support that Debbie's department required was exemplary. And I think, again, we should trust staff and go with that. I like what Debbie also said in terms of the slide on grant oversight, in terms of having a number 2 or number 3 where staff produces the rubric and makes the decision without council review, with the caveat that you provide weekly updates as you have been and been A1 with communication, but provide weekly updates on council. There wasn't a lot of debate when, the 4 of us would meet and talk about this. They would do the work. We would review the application, all 4 of us. We met weekly for 3 months, right? We went weekly for 3 months, and we would review approximately 75 applications a week early on, and then it trickled down a little bit. but we would review, or excuse me, 40, right, about 40. And so we would review every application, every applicant, look at their financial bona fides and look at their application, ask generous questions. But bottom line is they had structured this, council, Debbie's team had structured this so well that if you met A, B, and C, it was really, really easy to follow along. And then it wasn't just accept or not accept. Debbie and her team reached out to the businesses and said, well, you're still missing this. Can you get to us? And it was really a soft, welcoming kind of inclusion process that a lot of our businesses really helped so many businesses. So in an overall, my opinion on this is I favor this. I would favor this for the remainder of what's left, 250 to 350. I would encourage, and I would say at a cap of 5,000. I would include small businesses and home-based businesses. I would remove the cap on the number of employees. And one of the things that we talked about too is a few people on our committee indicated that they had a personal issue with giving our Elevate grant for businesses that make, $1 million in revenue. I would not be in favor of putting an economic cap on this for this reason. $1 million in revenue does not indicate $1 million in profit. And that doesn't indicate capital costs. And so what we had are businesses that were bringing in money, but we didn't really look in terms of what they were spending in terms of their profit loss margins. I would favor, for the most part, opening this up to all businesses that could prove that they qualify for a PPE, including home-based businesses, no cap on the number of employees, capped at $5,000. Thanks.
So, Councilmember Peterson, I appreciate your perspective and sharing out some of the experiences from the Elevate grant. I'm wondering, Debbie, though, how to move this conversation forward in a way that we can kind of tackle a piece at a time. So I reshared my screen to look at this page. I don't know if it makes sense to start with the amount we want to spend and then go back.
We need to look at the criteria first.
The criteria.
Yeah. So I would go back.
At this one?
Yeah, right there. So,
okay.
Do we want to serve all businesses, or do we want to put any cap on the revenues? So as Councilmember Peterson had proposed, we would have every business would be eligible if they met the criteria. There wouldn't be any industry sectors taken out of there, corporately owned and national chains, home-based storefront, and there would be no revenue cap. So bottom line is it would be all businesses, as Councilman Peterson had indicated. So I think that's a big question, because if you're going to narrow it down to only small businesses, the grants amounts are going to change, right? And then, so that's why I think we have to start with this piece first, and then move into how much we want to do the grant for. So I guess I would ask, how does everybody feel about all businesses?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Because you just said, depending on the size of the business, the grant amount would change. Is that true? Or if we set the amount?
If you decided to do, say, corporately owned national chains and businesses with over less than 25 people, then we're going to be serving a lot less people, right, than if we did everybody. So we might be able to go down to $150,000, because if the average, I think, is going to be around $1,750, we can serve, and the employees are under 25, and we're not doing corporately owned, and we're not doing that, we could serve more people. But now remember, this is 25, and I'm just dividing 2,500 into 350,000. I honestly believe the average is going to be not 2,500 as an example. It'll be about 1,750 based on how many businesses apply. So again, all I did on this page was take 350,000 and put 2,500 on it, and it would serve 140 businesses.
So Debbie, I need to ask you again. I don't know what you're talking about with the 17,000.
I think an average, if we gave it to everybody of every size, the average would be around $1,750. I don't think businesses are going to spend $2,500.
Oh, thank you. I thought you said 17,000. I was
no,
like
$1,750. I think the average would be, if we included everybody, big, little, small, home-based, everybody, I think the average would be around $1,750 that people would take, not the $2,500 or the $5,000 or the $7,500.
So can I ask you a question? Is there a reason, and maybe it's because we didn't do it before and I missed this part, is there a reason we wouldn't just say you can get a grant up to $2,500, period?
Yeah,
like, why don't we set the amount?
We can do that. We can do that. Or as Councilmember Peterson had said, we could do 5,000, maximum of 5,000, so that some of those big businesses, if they had to do a lot of improvements, they could take advantage of it. We could keep it at 2,500 too, a max of 2,500.
I guess that's why I keep wanting to go here first, because we're not going to have every business apply. Not every single, because we saw that already. Not everybody applied. I think to be more inclusive, we're going to hit more types of businesses. So I personally support being more inclusive. And so I would rather have a conversation about their demonstrated need personally, but we do have quite a few hands up. So I just want to see where everyone else is feeling. I just feel like if we're just talking, like, for example, Randall gave us a lot of his opinions, but I couldn't sort through which one we were talking about first. So I see some hands right now. I've got Councilmember Brown, Councilmember Goff, Councilmember Witkovich next. So Councilmember Brown, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts. These are not going to surprise you. I would like to exclude corporately owned national chains. They get a tax credit from the government when they do their taxes as related to COVID expenses. And I think that our home-based businesses and our storefront businesses, our local small businesses, need the money more than our national chains. And by national chains, I mean Best Buy and Marshalls and TJ Maxx and stuff like that. They're going to write that stuff off. So it's like paying them and having them write it off. So that's my thought on that. I am good with the real estate because I agree with you. We're talking PPE. I am totally fine with real estate for the nursing homes, and I'm fine with the small businesses for instance, at Phoenix. I'm just going to go a little bit ahead. I want the staff to do everything because they are awesome, and I would like Jason to sign off on them. And I would also like to take the money. This is where I kind of wanted to go. First of all, before I go there, I want to apologize to Councilmember Mullica for cutting her off. I apologize, and I am so sorry. So I would like to take the remaining $350,000 that we have from the Elevate grant, and I would like the $150,000 that we committed to Adams County that we didn't use anything for to fund this for our small businesses. Because I think we are going to have more people that come in. So I am in favor of $500,000 in spend, leaving out the corporately owned national chains, length of business down to 3 months, 3 months or more, because you don't have an option there for businesses that didn't open before COVID. Otherwise, I would be a little bit more flexible. I don't think for PPE, we need to look at a decline in gross revenues. This is PPE, not rent. So I think I hit that whole page with a couple other things. I think $500,000 and pull them. Is a deadline over for Adams County for them to apply for those loans, Debbie?
Yes, it is. It's closed.
Okay, so
and we did have we had about 13 of our businesses apply, which some of those things are included in here, some PPE stuff. So we did have about 13 of our businesses apply for the Adams County grant, but it is closed at this point.
And did we pay anything out on that?
No, that was their money. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I would be very much in favor of $500,000. and excluding the corporate chains. And trusting staff. I think that's really important because Debbie did a phenomenal job on this. And my level of trust, Debbie, exceeds bazillions. You can do anything you want and then have Jason sign off on it because that clears us for an audit.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. I would have to say that I would be more comfortable if we could not list all the things that we are approving, because I think staff is going to have trouble keeping track of who's saying yes for this and no to that when we're all over the whole PowerPoint, and I know I am. So I would just go, I thought we started off talking about ideas, and then next thing we know, I'm hearing all this other stuff. So I just wanted to back up a little bit. On the ideas, the telecommuting expenses, I think we're all, sounds like maybe on board with that, but I don't know because we didn't, I didn't hear from a lot of people. And in terms of supporting schools, I have a question about that because, we have some schools in our city that are part of District 12, but not all the schools. So, and then we have private schools. And so I don't know, I just feel like a little uncomfortable about schools. And then if we're going to do private schools and not the public schools, I feel like there's maybe Corey might need to kind of weigh in on including schools. So that was just the ideas thing. But then to get to where we are right now, I think, which is on the types of businesses, I agree with Councilmember Brown that corporately owned chains, I would like to exclude, and not just for the reasons she's giving. I hadn't even thought of all of that, but if we as a city decide and give money to a chain, a corporately owned chain, to help them out, and yet their corporate office in, I don't know where it is, Timbuktu, decides that they're going to close a bunch of chains, they could close the one that we just gave a bunch of this money to, and we have no control over that. So I don't think that that's a good use of money. In terms of the other kinds of businesses, I think the more people we can help, the better. And so I don't have a huge opinion on how to, restrict or anybody else to exclude except for that. So that's the business type and industry. So I don't know if other people want to weigh on, if anybody else has different comments on the types of businesses, and we could decide that, and then Debbie would know that, and then we could go on to the next one, or I mean, that I'm just linear in my own kind of organizational thinking.
Yeah.
So.
No, I'm with you. I hear what you're saying. So I wanted to back up for just a second, Catherine, because Debbie, when we asked the question about how much money we had left, you kind of read a bunch of numbers, but I'm so visual that went right over my head. So I held on to the last thing you said, which was we have about half of it left. So are we looking at like $160,000 or no, 1.6 million?
1.48.
1.48 million is left.
Right. Now there's some things that an amount has not been put on, which is a small business grant round 2, which we're talking about right now. We had on the list scholarship of rec programs, childcare to be determined, PPE needs at senior facilities to be determined, and reserve funding for second wave to be determined. So no amounts were put into there, but that's from the PowerPoint that was provided to City Council in the presentation.
So I have to clarify something though, because what you just, the very top item you said was what the small business round 2 is what we're talking about now. So are you saying that the $350,000 that's left is not, it's not accounted for yet?
It is, because we approved 850,000.
Okay.
Right. So we only used 500,000 of it. So it's already been accounted for in that 1.4.
So thank you. Okay. That's what I was wondering. So we have $350,000 plus the 150 you said we didn't use.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so we're already sitting at 500,000 to spend.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
Right.
Plus, if we get all excited about these new ideas, because I'm hearing a few new ideas that aren't on the table yet, those could potentially come out of the 1.4 that's left.
Right. It could, yes. Or it depending if it related to this grant, it would
We
be
could-
incorporated into it, right?
Okay.
So depending, again, I have to check some things out like delivery charges. Advertising for businesses has been tough to get the CARES Act. I will tell you, all the city economic developments have really tried to figure out how to use CARES Act for advertising, and none of us have been successful as an approved piece. So that's not, if we found a way that we could do that, then that would be something that we would include under this grant. But it would, if we approve 500,000 and 3 more ideas, I would recommend that it be under that 500,000. We wouldn't ask for additional money under this grant.
But there's 1.48 to spend if we wanted to, is what I'm
Right.
asking. Okay. So I could sort of see, as far as the linear discussion goes, why we were thinking of putting the new ideas at the end of the conversation so that we can get through this part.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at this presentation, if we do take it one at a time, which I think we should, if we don't all have to weigh in, if we can get some sort of thumbs up or something, some signal to Debbie so that she can see which direction to go. So I think because we're getting really good at talking in circles. So if we can try to be a little more linear, I appreciate Catherine's comment. So looking at the types of businesses, do you want me to reproject the presentation? Is that helpful for council?
Yeah, I think it is for everybody.
Well, it's harder for me to see all my people is the problem. So as soon as I project, then I can't see your
I
face.
can read it. I can read it without any
I
problem.
think we need like a polling ability on here. Doesn't Zoom have a polling option? That would have been awesome for this
That would
conversation.
have been nice. I know.
Have we agreed on a funding amount, Mayor?
Well, that's where I was going, but then people backed me back out. So I think we're okay without the funding piece just yet. So let's go to types of businesses. So
and real quick, Mayor, Ashley's been waiting as well, just FYI.
I see her. I mean, she's going to speak after I have my question. So types of businesses. So what I've heard is we've got about 828 storefront and home-based total. Does that include the 100 corporate or is, okay. So if you took the 100 corporate out, we'd be sitting at 528.
528, yeah.
No, we'd be sitting at 728.
Well, plus the 200. Plus
Right.
the 200, right.
Okay, 728 total businesses if we take out. So I guess the first question for me is, I don't know, maybe speak out if you would like the corporately owned chains to be included.
Oh, no.
Right. So I asked it backwards. Okay. So raise your hand if you want the corporately owned national chains to be included. Just Randall.
One of the things, it's like I would need a point of clarification in terms of we have corporately owned chains, but many of these with, like the rents that we discovered, like a 7-Eleven, are operated by sole proprietors within the city. And so I would obviously want to prioritize our small businesses and our home-based businesses.
Right.
So instead of a blanket yes or no, we could be innovative and structure something to where the priority application period is for our small businesses and home-based businesses, maybe for 3 weeks, and then add, corporately owned things. But I'm okay restricting them and even limiting them. But my point of clarification would be, as opposed to the big, faceless corporation, how many of these are run by individuals? And Catherine made a great point in terms of, and Becky as well, of what they're getting from their national income. So I would prioritize our small businesses, but I'm hesitant, just slightly hesitant, to just de facto eliminate them.
Well, we do have, if you look at the criteria, it's in there as well. It just like the Elevate grant, if they're a franchisee and they own their franchisee, we would include them. So like the different ones that we did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But to Catherine's point, I mean, you were spot on with that, is corporations are closing sites all over the place and that money could just disappear. So that was a great point, and that's why I kind of moved to your side of that argument. So it sounds like corporately owned national chains will not be included, Debbie.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Okay. We made a decision. I'm so excited. Okay. Ashley, would you like to add something?
No, I like this system. I'm fine with
Okay.
this.
Okay. We're moving along now. Fantastic. Okay. So are there any other industry sectors that are not eligible? So you had, Debbie, real estate, storage, nonprofits, and banks.
And that's because that's what we use for Elevate. That was just, again, that was for the Elevate grant. Is there anything here, any type of industries that we would not want to include in here if they could not qualify? Meaning that they didn't, if they could qualify with an expense, so qualified expense, is there any industry that you would want to disqualify?
Okay, I don't think so. And I thought I heard Councilmember Mullica ask us to prioritize one industry.
Right. Yeah.
Does everyone agree with that? Do we all feel good about that? Julie, did you want to add? I think I was trying to.
No, I think I just wanted to clarify because real estate was on here and I thought she said the assisted livings were under the real estate category. So I want those included.
Yes, yes. And again, those were just examples that we did for the Elevate grants, just to give you some ideas.
Okay. Councilmember Brown?
I think that we have to exclude schools. Is this the proper point to be talking about that?
Yeah. Well, I have business.
And I didn't include schools, Councilmember Brown, in those numbers. So that's 700, 800 businesses. Schools were not included in there. Nonprofits were not included in there. And churches were not included in that number. So again, churches, schools, nonprofits right now aren't in those numbers. How does that?
Right. I don't know. I worry about the smaller churches, I think we should, I am suggesting that we open it up to our churches unless that gets us in trouble some way. But I am okay with opening it up to any industry now that I have your clarification.
I think Jason just came on. He might have some clarification.
I just wanted to mention, Debbie had mentioned before, we have a nonprofit grant program.
Oh, okay.
So schools, churches, other nonprofits, I would say would not qualify as a business. And so definitely leave that out of this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
Perfect. Any other industry related? Otherwise, we're going to say we're good. And then we're going to prioritize those. What did we call them? Are they the assisted living?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Downing.
Just for clarification, does this include the sublease space? Because I think that's important for some of the businesses that actually lease a space from an owner, like a petition or some of those places. They also have a lot of expense. So I just want a clarification to make sure that that's included.
That's the way we've written it, is that they would be included. Any business that could qualify.
Thank you, Debbie.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to qualify that the business must have a revenue of a certain amount? I don't believe so. I see a lot of shaking heads. Okay. So is that good, Debbie? You got that section?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Length of time as a Northglenn business. 3, 6, 9, 12. I heard 3. I see a lot of 3s. Antonio, how do you feel about it? 6 for Antonio.
Repeat the question, please.
Length of time as a Northglenn business.
I had a couple businesses reach out that didn't have an opportunity to open before COVID. And now, they're getting ready to open. I think we should include them.
Antonio, do you want to speak to your 6 since you're an outlier on that one?
Not particularly. If everybody else is comfortable with what they're comfortable with, I'm good.
Okay.
So do we want all businesses no matter how, or 3 months?
I think it's 3, but I had a question. So you had said that it's a range from March to September.
Mm-hmm.
So if they, I don't know, if they open in July, does that give them July, August, September? Or no? If they open in June, July, August?
Mhm. So we do have some companies that potentially will open soon, like 7-Eleven over on Huron Center. They plan on opening in a couple weeks potentially. We've got Dutch Brothers, right? That's under construction that will be opening maybe, let's just say that they might be opening in 2 months. So you're right. It could be, we could change it to, it doesn't matter how long you've been open. So that would cover everybody. Or we go with the 3 months. Because it is based on your business license when you've done it. That's the date that we use. When you file your business license, that's the date, the magic date that we use. And then they'd have to be open for at least 3 more months after that.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. I just kind of feel like, I mean, I know these things are planned months, if not years in advance, but especially a chain or a franchise that's opening now. I mean, they're opening with complete awareness of what's the situation is, and that they would be including in their plans to do the things that they're required by our health, mandates right now. So I'm still comfortable with the 3 months.
Okay. I think that was what we had pretty much. And so 3 months it is. Demonstrate a need for the grant. So a negative impact, either a percent decline or a dollar amount decline. I had a question. I think you mentioned it while you were presenting, Debbie, that because it's not for rental assistance, it's for PPE, that maybe this part wouldn't fit. But do they have to demonstrate a need to
They
receive?
do have to, they have to, there will be a place right on the application that says, have you been negatively impacted by COVID-19? We had on our application for Elevate Grant, how much? And I think that's good to keep it that way, but not necessarily mandate that if you only had 2% revenue loss or 15% revenue. We weren't using that as a criteria. But this one, again, I'll let the people on the task force chime in, because this was one of the conversations that we had on several of the businesses. But Councilmember Peterson is totally correct. They may be making in gross sales over $1 million, but they're paying their employees out of there, and they've got their overhead, and they have their rent, and they have all their expenses. So really what their profit and loss is not greater gross income of over $1 million, right? Their income might be very much smaller than that after they pay all their expenses. So I think it's good for us as to have that on the application, so we know what that is. I think it really does show who's been impacted and who hasn't been. That's been really a helpful piece that we had in there, because we could see the ones that were suffering more than anybody else. If they were impacted 100%, we knew they needed help, right? If they were only impacted at 15%, they didn't need as much help. So the question would be, is that important that we put a criteria on if a certain amount of gross revenues? My personal opinion is no. I think it's good to have it on there so that we can see how much they were impacted, so that we can try to help them even more outside of this grant with personal help. But I personally don't see that as being a criteria. But again, I want to leave that open to all of you. And definitely the task force members can chime in because they were part of those conversations, and why there was conversations around it.
Does anyone feel strongly? Councilmember Brown? No, you don't think it's necessary? Okay. Anybody feel strongly about including that piece? Okay. Now we are moving into number of employees. Should we have an employee requirement? And if so, what would you like that to be? I'm saying no. Councilmember Mullica?
I guess I would want to, I guess what would be the benefit of having an employee requirement? Because I actually don't think there should be any. Is there something that we should know about implementing an employee requirement? Okay.
Councilmember Brown?
you know, if we don't include a minimum, then we would get those people who have just one person working for their company and we wouldn't know, right? So a one-person shop, like Randall had talked about for accounting, a one-person shop doesn't need any PPE, right? They can take care of that all on their own. So I think it should be like more than one in a check mark, you know what I mean? So that we can track that it's not just a singular person.
I would say also think about that hairstylist is one person, right?
You're right.
Mm-hmm.
So I have Councilmember Peterson and then Goff.
Debbie said it great. I don't think there should be any minimum for employees. A self-business, again, if I'm an attorney or an accountant, you know, I don't need the PPE equipment for the most part, unless I'm having people come to my place of business. If I'm a entrepreneur, sole proprietor, hairstylist, or something of the like, I do need that. And so I think it's a false standard. The merit of the application will weed out the good from the bad. I do not favor a required number of employees. 0.
So can I ask a question about that? Because I was understanding when we get further down, when I was thinking about the amount of the grant, if we set it at, just hypothetically, everybody gets $1,000, $1,000 to the single person is going to buy a lot of masks. The PPE for a company that has 50 employees is going to be much more expensive. And so they're going to end up taking a financial hit where this person's going to be swimming in money. Not that they shouldn't. I'm trying to figure that part out is, will they then say, this is what I have spent on PPE? Will you
reimbursement? It's
so
only
it's
a reimbursable grant.
Got it. Okay.
They have to have already spent it. Is only reimbursable. So they will give us receipts that they actually spent it. And we have to verify that it was for PPE, and then we would reimburse them for that amount.
Perfect. Councilmember Goff?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up. I was going to say something along those lines that if the grant, let's say the maximum is, I don't know, what, $2,000 or whatever we decide, I don't see that every single person is going to get that much. That's not what happened with the rent program. It's just, that's the most they can get. And they're going to have to hand in receipts to show that they used it on things that we're saying are important. And I think there should be no employee limit, because this is, it is to protect the employees, but it's also to protect their customers. And so we want, if it's just one person, if they're doing something where they're interacting with other people, they need to have the health protection pieces in place.
Councilmember Downing?
Yes, I wanted to weigh in on this. I don't believe there should be a limit either. And I'm just looking at my business, and definitely I don't need anything in my home office. But when I go and meet a client, I have to have the PPE. And when I hold the sales or different things that we would do that, we have to have all the equipment and everything set in place to abide by the law that goes with that. So definitely a no.
Okay. So I think that's what I'm hearing. I don't think anyone wanted to add that. Are you okay with that change, Councilmember Brown? Okay. And then how many business locations are they eligible for, one or all? Do we have a lot of small business that, there's just a couple.
There's only a handful.
Okay. So are we going to go?
And that was the criteria we had with the Elevate grant. So again, I was trying to clarify that for this grant, so there's no questions asked.
Okay. And then we already covered the sublease thing. We're good there. Okay. So now I will share this screen again, just so I think we've landed here with the financial piece. I'm okay with C at 2,500. I'll just throw that out there, but we can change. What do other people think?
Madam Mayor, may I just add one thing while we're doing this? So this is why we kind of did the exercise first, was now that corporately owned national companies, the big guys, are not included in this, we may not need as much money. So that's now that, the bigger companies would have needed more money, but now we've eliminated those, at least 100 of those out of there that would have probably taken the maximum amount, right? Whatever the maximum amount would be. Let's just say it was $5,000. 100 of those companies probably would have needed $5,000, the big 100 corporately national companies. We've eliminated those. So now I think we're going to be serving a lower amount because our businesses are small. So I don't think they're going to need as much money. So I think reducing down the grant limit, the 2,500 instead of the 5, I think would work very well. So the maximum of 2,500, small businesses, I can't imagine are going to exceed that. But that's, again, just a thought.
Right. Councilmember Whitkovich.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree exactly with what you said, Mayor, the $2,500 max. And I'm willing to do the 500,000, although based on what Debbie just said, if we don't need the 500,000, I'd be willing to do 450. I definitely trust what you have to say, Debbie. But yeah, I'd say the $2,500 max.
Great. I just went with the 500,000 because that's what we have left. Councilmember Mullica.
I'm okay with the 500,000 and the 2,500 cap. The only thing is say, for example, if there are, I don't know, say like a smaller business who went over, can we be flexible with that? I don't know. If there are specific situations that this business had to deal with, or especially if it's an assisted living facility and their expenses are just through the roof, I don't know, can we have a little flexibility with that? I wouldn't mind that being an option.
Well, I had a wondering about that too. And that's why I went back to these slides really quickly, because we talked about the PPE, but we're not just talking about this. And so when we go down and talk about some of those equipment, if we do have companies that have sent, computers home, I know we spent some money trying to make sure everyone had an appropriate device at home. And that could get you over your 2,500 in technology. And then some of these plexiglass pieces are going to cost money. And then for the companies that then did add this type of thing, that's also going to increase so that's a good point. So I don't know how we want to work that, but I'm good changing that amount based on that it's more than just masks and gloves. Councilmember Peterson.
I would agree with that with Councilwoman Mullica. I'd like to maybe have, a max of 5,000 and then, again, have the liberty that we can talk about to look at things and those types of things. And perhaps, if we don't want to do a council committee and that's down the road, or we trust Debbie's team to make that decision. But one of those things is that if we had a max of 5,000, keep in mind is with the Elevate grant is very few people ask for the max of 6, right? And so if we had a max of 5,000, I wouldn't see people, especially all they have to do is show proof and receipts. I wouldn't see people taking advantage of this. And that's not what hopefully our businesses do. They say, yeah, this has cost us this much. And so for the small mom and pop business that's putting up plexiglass, they submit a receipt for $1,500. For the assisted living facility that's doing a giant structural thing, which I would agree with having priority, that's up to or beyond 5,000. I would want us to have that liberty to do the right thing for those folks.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say something similar. I think Debbie was saying that she was projecting the average amount of a grant that these businesses might use would be under $2,000. I think she said 17 something. So if we made our maximum 5,000, according to, if everybody got 5,000, that'd be 100 businesses, but probably we'll do more than 100 businesses. And in our first round with the grants for rent, we gave out grants to 131 businesses. So it seems to me that quite likely that we could do that in the same number of businesses again. if we did option C and then went with a $5,000 limit or maximum. I'm sorry, limit, maximum.
And I would also say that 1750 that I was using as an average, that was basing it on the large businesses, the corporately owned. So again, I think that's going to be much lower. I think we're talking for small businesses around 500 to 1,000 probably.
Councilmember Whitkovich?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know my hand was up. I don't have anything. Well, I will say I'm fine doing the 5,000 if everybody else is on board with that.
Okay. So I think we've moved to the grant oversight section. There were 3 options provided. I'll go ahead and share them again so you can see them. And then there's another option. So if you have another idea, I think, the task force would either be a new task force, I'm assuming, or the same group that has been doing the Elevate grant. I'm actually fine with number 3. But if people have other ideas, take a look. Councilmember Goff likes number 3. Whitkovich, Downing. Is that a 3, Councilmember Escobar? Okay, so it sounds okay. Does anyone want to speak to that? No? Okay. Well, I have to tell you, this is super exciting. It made me think about the restaurant mini grants that we gave to restaurants and residents. That was just so amazing. I mean, to hand those out, everyone was so excited, so surprised, so taken aback. It wasn't a buy one, get one free coupon that we typically get, it was legit, and that really felt good. And I think this is, even though it might only be $500 to a business, that's a lot of money, and that's really helpful. So this is exciting. Thank you, Debbie. Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any other questions for her, Councilmember Peterson?
Are we concluding with Debbie's presentation on this and thus concluding our study session? I believe so. All right, can I take this? Let me speak on this a little bit then. We have council until our timeline for Elevate grant runs out. And I want to just kind of plant the seed of thinking beyond this kind of stuff and what we need to do in terms of 1.4 some million over 4 months, right? Because if we don't spend it, we lose it. Okay. And something to keep in mind is this allocated that we spend it, or allocate to spend or spent, right, by December 4th. And we have really, really good things. Again, we're starting up, Antonio and Ashley and I are on the committee with outside agency funding to look at the $500K for community and nonprofit grants that's going to start. Susan, correct me, or excuse me, Joanna, correct me. I think that's in a week and a half in mid-July. But we talked about this stuff with the daycare and scholarships and things along those lines. And so beyond businesses, beyond nonprofits, and again, we're seeing the numbers rise, as we all can read, right, in the news. We're seeing very, very problematic statistics. And this isn't based on a second wave. This is the failure of the first wave to subside. And so I would just, as we all think about this, what do we do with 1.4 million that's smart and strategic and help the most amount of people that maybe haven't been touched by what we've done so far, that we can think of over, I mean, it's July, so we got July, August, September, October and November. So maybe 5 months, but 4.5 months to really, really think about how we can really, really maximize this for the most benefit of all of our residents. So it's not a question, but as we think about things going forward, I'm just conscious of the time. I don't want us to make a terrible decision, not a terrible, but a rush decision, right, on November 30th or December 1st, right, when we gotta write a check for something.
So that's a really good question. Rupa, do you have access to the tentative future agenda document and let us know when we're coming back for this conversation?
Yeah, I don't think we have anything scheduled right now, but would this be during a study session?
Possibly. I mean, it's to Randall's point, it's a conversation that we need to finish. It hasn't been completed.
Agreed.
So maybe just make a note of that and you guys can figure that out. Councilmember Bronco?
Yeah, and I think I agree. This needs to be something that we come back to because we still have, quite a bit of money to spend and we want to use it in the best way possible. And we're not really sure what the next couple months are going to bring it as challenges to our businesses or to our community members. And so I think it would be great to come back and have this conversation. And one of the things I actually just thought about during this conversation that we had tonight is, school is coming. And I don't know if there's a way, because Adams 12 hasn't decided yet what they're going to be doing. And I don't know about some of the other schools, but, is there a way to support those families in need for computers or something like that, especially if that's going to be kind of part of the reality of school. I don't know, but yeah, there's probably a lot of other ideas that people have that we kind of need to start thinking about because we want to make sure that we have time to implement them and be effective as we need to.
Councilmember Malika, I also was wondering, and you don't have to, but I was wondering if you wanted to share anything about conversations that are happening with Tri-County Health.
Sure, yeah. So as you guys saw from the email this morning, Tri-County Health, the board is meeting on Wednesday to discuss a potential mask ordinance for Adams and Arapahoe County. And a lot of that is because we're seeing an increase of cases in our areas. And so we need to be really thoughtful about how we want to move forward with this. We have, what's great is, we're keeping a really good tab on how this is moving through our community. We have lots of data to support that we need to potentially be doing a little bit more. So especially for Adams County, those numbers aren't looking good. So they're not headed in the right way. So yeah, feel free to tune in on Wednesday. And then if not, then I'm sure you guys are gonna hear what that outcome is because I know that Rupert's on those calls. So, but yeah, any questions you guys have, feel free to ask.
Well, and the other thing, just a second, Catherine, I was approached, there is a movement among mayors in the metro area to come together and sort of request that the governor implements a mandatory mask order. And so I was sent a draft of a letter saying, will you sign on? And I did not make a commitment because it was something I needed to talk with all of you about. I responded back with my concern being enforcement is the hardest part, that I felt like we did as much as we could do in our city. But there is a kind of, through the metro mayors and the regional work, a question about would you support and would you do a mandatory mask order? So I did commit to asking you what you thought. So what do you think about a mandatory mask order?
For the whole council?
All of council. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Councilmember
Catherine's raising her hand.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Catherine.
This is what I was going to get to. I mean, I've received a couple of letters from residents who do not want a mask mandate for a variety of reasons that some of which I don't actually agree with, I have to say. And so I did want to say this, in this forum where people can hear that we are taking this seriously. We're considering, the pros and cons in terms of the science that's supporting the use or the benefits of wearing the mask. Right. It's changed in that I know that's confusing for people. That's because, all our scientists and medical professionals have been trying to figure out how to deal with this pandemic. So things change. They just do change. And just Just right now, it seems really clear. So much evidence has come out that if you have the virus and you wear a mask, you are much, much, much less likely to spread that to anyone else. Now, people are going to say, well, I don't have it, so why should I have? Well, we don't know that you have it or don't have it. I mean, that's kind of the problem with this virus, is you either could have it and have no symptoms ever, or you could have it and your symptoms don't show up for several days, and in the meantime, you're spreading it. And so that's why we are asking people to wear the mask. That, people, and the arguments or whatever I've heard people say that it's not going to help me. It might even, weaken my immune system or something. There's all these other things out there. But the point is that if you have it, the mask is the most effective way we have right now to contain the spread of it. And that's why we are asking people to wear it. I would support a mandate. I know it's going to be very difficult to enforce. I know we're going to get a lot of flack for it, but I mean, I would support it just personally, and as a council member, as a person who considers myself informed and keeping on top of research. I would say yes.
Oh, you would say yes to having a mandatory mask order? How would?
Yes. Yeah, I would support that if it gets to that point. I mean, I don't know if we're there yet.
Well, I'm thinking that might come from the Tri-County Health conversation. I don't think it's something that Northglenn would do on our own. The enforcement of it is the tricky part.
Yes, I agree.
When you make it mandatory, I mean, they're handing out expensive tickets in Denver. So we had a hard enough time with fireworks. I can't even get into that right now. Okay. Well, okay. Anything else for the good of the group? Councilmember Brown.
I actually had a question on the mask mandate. I remember a conversation that we had with Corey just about the time that when we made the mask necessary. And I thought that the city couldn't mandate to wear masks. Only the businesses could mandate it, the wearing of masks in their stores. But it sounds to me like,
based on how we wrote it, that's how it is.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. We shall see.
And I did have a question if we're finishing up the meeting. Meredith, I don't understand why we have to wait until July 13th to get the information on the fireworks. I'd like to see us get that sooner, if possible. I just realized again, we're in July.
I know, I'm like, it's Monday, but you're right. It does. Well, and per Amanda's email, you'll get that information in the packet on Thursday.
Okay, so, all right.
3 days away.
If someone could just remind me throughout the meetings we're in July, I would be okay.
Councilmember Esquivel.
I would recommend getting a tattoo that you can dial out what month you're in. First of all, with reference to masks, I would support you signing on to a letter to the governor, because a governor mandate, then that makes it law. And then we have to comply. So if he was to buy into it, it would be easier for everybody else. And the reason I support that is because it becomes so politicized, the top of the ladder will not wear a mask. So as it trickles down, people have all this confusion about whether they should wear it or not, instead of just listening to the science. And if the science says it's a good thing, then why don't we just do it? In terms of the fireworks, yeah. My neighborhood was Second World War, First World War, and Vietnam and Afghanistan all in one night.
I know.
I had a lot of calls, a lot of emails. I think people expected me to go out and enforce. I can't. I don't have a cute little badge to do that with.
Yeah.
but yeah, anyway, it would be nice to find out if we were effective at all. I from what I've seen, I think we got an F. I would be happy to see a D or a C, but I think we got an F on enforcement. That's all I have. Thank you.
That sounded for sure. Councilmember Brown.
As you guys know, I'm in a hot spot right now. We're rolling out in California. They are rolling everything back just this side of closing businesses again. So I do want to tell you that the governor here in California mandated we wear masks, and I never see a person without a mask, except for at the beach. And I didn't go, but I never see a person with a mask. So without a mask. And to Antonio's point, I think it's because the governor mandated it. And the fines are really hefty here. They're $500, but I don't think the enforcement part is the hard part, but it definitely spurred people to wear them. I don't go out much because I'm a little afraid, but in my times out, I have not seen anybody without a mask. So I would also be in favor of you doing that.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that conversation. Thank you so much. And if you guys want to chat, I did send an email out. If you want to talk it through, give me a call. Just ideas, no decisions were made, just conversation starters. So if you want to give me a call this week, I'd love to chat with you. I hope everyone's doing well, and we'll see you next week. Becky.
Real quick, Catherine? Catherine, you there?
Yes.
What month do you have, Catherine?
This is for Becky.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.